Hey there, welcome to Newsfeed. I'm Michelle London. Today we're talking about financial literacy, why conversations about money aren't happening more at home, and how it's getting introduced in more formal ways. Plus this. A town with few resources and no history of taking in refugees has successfully helped families from Afghanistan find housing and steady jobs. How they made it happen. Plus, careers in STEM are well-paying, but the schooling can be expensive. How one town is making that education more accessible with some creativity. We're now 100 days into Russia's war in Ukraine, and it's hard to know exactly how many people have died so far. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says as many as 100 soldiers are dying every day, and tens of thousands of civilians have lost their lives so far. Russia hasn't reported any numbers in 2 months. They say about 1,300 of their soldiers have been killed. But outside observers believe the numbers are much higher. Well, Tesla is facing some tough questions about phantom braking. More than 700 complaints have come in about cars slowing down or stopping without warning. Tesla originally dismissed the complaints, but now the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is demanding answers. The car maker has until June 20th to respond. Students haven't had to wear masks for most of the school year, but Sacramento is bringing them back in the last few weeks of class. Starting Monday, the city's school district is reinstating the mandate. The CDC just moved Sacramento County into the high level of community transmission. Well, there's a science behind shopping carts, what new research is saying about where the handle is placed and how much we spend at the store. Now states are taking more of an interest in requiring some sort of financial education. This year, some 37 states have taken legislative action on financial literacy. But there's also been pushback about hard requirements to teach this in schools. A transformative year for Black NBA coaches. For the first time, they now lead 50% of the league's franchises. 60 years ago, Bill Russell broke the NBA coaching color barrier, becoming the first Black man to coach a team. Well, this week, the state of California released the first ever comprehensive look at the impact of 150 years of slavery on Black life in America. The report details the long-lasting harms that enslavement and discrimination had on generations of Black families. This past spring, Evanston, Illinois, became the first city in the nation to issue reparations through a government payment program, and their first initiative focuses on decades of housing discrimination. Well, the government just erased the most student debt with one measure. $5.8 billion in federal student loans are now gone for anyone who went to a school owned by Corinthian colleges. The for-profit chain of schools closed back in 2015 and had a history of defrauding students. Wedding season is upon us, and this one is expected to be busy. Research company The Wedding Report projects 2.5 million weddings this year, which is a 40-year high. Half of Americans say they plan to go to a wedding, according to data from NerdWallet. Almost the same number of millennials say they plan to go to more than one. And with higher prices for just about everything right now, expenses are adding up quick. Experts at NerdWallet suggest starting what's called a sinking fund to help prepare.
Create a new bank account that's actually labeled with that goal. So you might call the new bank account My Wedding Money, for example. And that way it reminds you what exactly the money is for. You won't touch it or spend it for other things. And you're moving money into it. It can actually be helpful to automate those savings. So you can automatically transfer a certain amount every single month or from every paycheck into that account. And that way it just grows automatically without you having to do too much thinking about it.
And if you're traveling for a wedding, she says now may also be a good time to cash in on any credit rewards you have for hotels or plane tickets. Right now, the average price of a round-trip ticket is about $330. That's up 40% from the start of the year, according to numbers from Hopper. If your credit card doesn't offer rewards like that, consider shopping around for one that does.
So you don't want to wait too long if you want to make sure you're able to cash in those rewards for the wedding. And so you want to do some comparison shopping using an online comparison tool.
But she says to be smart about the purchases you make when trying to get travel points from a credit card. If you're unable to pay off credit bills, the interest you accrue will hurt you more in the long run than just paying the full cost for travel. And if budgeting in a wedding just isn't in the cards for you, don't be afraid to say it.
You shouldn't feel bad if you can't afford to go to a wedding, and you can have an honest talk with your friend to assure them it's not a reflection of your relationship. It's still really important to you, but it might just not be in your budget to go to a wedding, because we're getting invited to so many weddings this year and it's really expensive.
Next on Newsfeed, how something as simple as a shovel can go a long way in restoring our coastal communities. Dogs are able to detect even asymptomatic cases of COVID with high accuracy. A new study published in the journal PLOS ONE says the dogs that were tested in research accurately identified 97% of positive cases. Researchers are now looking into how well they can detect different variants. Women are more likely than men to develop rash-like side effects after a first dose of Moderna's vaccine. That's what a new Japanese study found. Around 22% of women developed delayed skin reactions after one shot, compared to 5% of men. Today, the country is reacting to another mass shooting. This time, 5 people, including the gunman, died at a medical office in Tulsa. And in the coming weeks, the U.S. Supreme Court will take up a gun safety case. The case challenges New York's restrictions on carrying concealed handguns on the basis that they violate the Second Amendment. If the High Court overturns New York's law, it could mean other laws on state-level firearms will be struck down as well. Well, police in Berkeley, California say they stopped a plot to attack a school. They arrested a 16-year-old who was recruiting other students to take part. Investigators say the teen was planning either a mass shooting or bombing. A search warrant of the teen's home discovered explosives and assault rifles, as well as parts to make weapons. Well, prepare yourself for a hotter than usual summer. Right now, cities across the nation are putting measures in place to protect residents during extreme temperatures. Recently, temperature records were set in Mississippi and Texas. In Oregon, workplace agencies have already put rules in place to protect workers from heat-related illnesses. And on this unofficial start to summer, many of us might be thinking about a trip to the beach. But what if you were blocked from walking along part of your favorite beach? Well, many shorelines on the West Coast are public land, but along the East Coast, that's not always the case. Chris Conti tells us about a new effort to change that. As we feel the pain at the pump, trucking companies are seeing the worst of it. AAA reports diesel fuel is now at an average of $5.53 a gallon, with prices about $1 higher than that in California and most of the Northeast. Europe is also experiencing record inflation. Food and fuel costs sent inflation up to 8.1% in May. March and April were record breakers as well for the euro. The war in Ukraine is partly to blame for rising prices. Here in the U.S., inflation is affecting consumer confidence. In May, it hit a 3-month low. People's plans to make big purchases like cars and houses declined. And experts say rate hikes and rising prices will likely keep that spending in check. Senator Tammy Duckworth told Taiwan the U.S. will continue supporting the country, especially its national security. She visited the island nation off China's coast for the second time this year and met with the president. China maintains that Taiwan is one of its provinces and has no president. Just yesterday, China sent 30 military planes flying near the island. Rising mortgage rates didn't slow down rising home prices in March. The newsfeed starts with stock market data showing U.S. home prices were just over 20% higher than they were in March of 2021. The average rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage stood at 3.29% at the start of January and ended March at 4.67%. A new poll from Morning Consult finds remote tech workers would rather quit than be monitored by their employer. This was for things like video recording and facial recognition. More companies have been considering the technology as a way to make sure work is getting done at home. Past research has suggested that Coffee drinkers live longer, and a new study published in the Annals of Internal Medicine says that finding stands whether or not you like your coffee sweet. Now, during a 7-year follow-up period, researchers found participants who drank between 1 and 3 cups a day of any type of coffee had up to a 31% lower death risk. Well, new technology is making telekinesis possible. Tomorrow, how a mobility-challenged patient is able to drive a race car using only thoughts. For teenagers across the country, it's been hard battling mental health struggles over the last few years. We've spent the last few weeks talking to various groups of people, asking them one simple question: how are you doing? Cars nowadays are getting smarter and more high-tech. And when you shop for a car these days, you don't necessarily need to seek out tech features anymore, as they've become standard. But what does that mean for the value of your car over time? Starting tomorrow, the National Hockey League is pausing the season 2 days before its planned Christmas break. Now, this comes as teams have had to postpone games because of COVID. Players are set to report back to team facilities on Sunday and resume daily testing.
I mean, when you're at that threshold of 17,000 feet, you're living at 17,000 feet. It's still a struggle.
From his home in Cortez, Colorado.
Thanks for being here. Yeah.
Philip Henderson hops on his weekly Zoom call. This team of experienced mountaineers is talking strategy, preparation, and survival months before embarking on a historic climb.
You know, training, it's not just the physical stuff, but it's even all those little mental things.
Early next spring, they hope to become the first all-black team to summit Mount Everest, the world's highest mountain. The crew, named Full Circle Everest, has grown to 7 men and 2 women, living everywhere from Florida, California, New York, and Colorado. They're no strangers to the great outdoors. Philip will lead this expedition. At 58, he's got 30 years of climbing experience and memorable expeditions under his belt.
But this is actually on Kilimanjaro.
Everest, which borders China and Nepal, reaches an elevation of more than 29,000 feet, which means living in the great outdoors in extremely high altitudes for several weeks.
It'll take approximately 2 months. Yeah. You know, an average day could be 6, 8 hours, 10 hours.
Philip is training to be ready for every scenario, all while carrying 50 pounds of necessities.
A sleeping pad, a sleeping bag, a few layers of clothing, a stove, fuel. In some ways, I feel pressure of being the team leader.
This mission is about more than just a team. They want to do something bigger. Bring awareness of outdoor sports to members of the Black and brown communities who may not see it as an option.
I really feel like it's representation, and it's like when you see people like yourself doing things, and you're more likely to do it.
A study from Resource Report highlights that underrepresentation. African Americans only make up 1.2% of all visitors in national parks, including hiking trails, while Latinos account for between 3.8 and 6.7%. Non-Hispanic whites make up between 88 and 95%. Discrimination is also a factor. Black Americans were banned from certain public sites through segregation until the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Physical safety is another concern. In a 2018 study, 66% of black participants said they associated certain forests, trails, and similar environments with slavery and lynchings in the Jim Crow era.
To me, it's still day to day. I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Philip is working to change these statistics through education, exposure, and awareness.
Mesa Verde National Park.
Challenging his community and himself in a big way.
To get all the voices that I know exist out there in the Black and brown community, so it's not uncommon.
There we go.
Arzel Lewis knows what it means to be a champion.
My senior year, I became all-conference, and I had some Defensive Player of the Year awards.
Reflecting on his playing days as a Division I basketball player at Idaho State, Lewis was on the fast track to success on the court. But something was missing.
I was at NBA pre-draft camp, and I basically was one of, 4 or 5 people there, 3 people there with no dad, manager, or agent.
Lewis admits struggling to play on a top level without his father in the stands, something he was forced to come to terms with as a junior in high school.
My dad was convicted and given 96 years in prison for cannabis, 3 cannabis charges. Once I found that out, to me, it felt like my dad had died. So I was pretty much out there all by myself.
Arzell says those feelings of isolation brought on extreme pressure and insecurity that showed up during games.
I didn't always shoot the ball when I was supposed to shoot the ball. I didn't always, take that chance that I could have taken because I didn't always believe in myself.
Back then in the early 2000s, Lewis said he ignored his mental state and toughened it out because of the stigma placed around prioritizing mental health, especially in sports. And he's not alone.
They've got a dream and a goal, and they're working hard to get there.
Dr. Steve Portanga, performance psychologist with iPerformance Consultants.
And a lot of athletes often get into situations, particularly in the Olympics, which only happen every 4 years, that not only do they want to do it for themselves, but they want to do it for everyone that has supported them along the way.
During the Tokyo Olympics, the topic on athletes prioritizing mental health received global recognition when gymnast Simone Biles dropped out of the team competition.
And I think in doing what Simone did, a tremendous role model for other athletes to be able to take a break, hit pause, reflect when they need to.
Portanga says it's also helping to raise awareness and maybe even break the stigma attached. According to a recent Axios study, stories done on mental health in athletes have generated at least 2 million interactions.
Part of their identity, how they value themselves, how they think other people value them, is tied into their performance and that expectation.
Just the amount of stress and the amount of work that I did with the staff and the coaches. People being away from family, adults having roommates for the first time.
Portanga helps his clients to stop connecting their identity with their performance, finding other areas to place their value.
And trying to really cultivate some of those types of experience based on whatever values they have. For a lot of athletes, it's trying to have a platform to maybe eventually do some speaking, something to help give back to other athletes.
And Lewis has done just that. He shares his story often, using the lessons, even the tough ones from basketball, as a blueprint for his success. Launching a magazine called Becoming a Champion 3 years ago, he's on a mission to help younger athletes.
I'm just trying to expose them to different industries and areas of life that I wasn't exposed to.
Using lessons he learned to keep their mental health at the forefront.
And that's the importance of really taking care of yourself, mind, body, and soul.
I'm Michelle London, reporting.
This machine allows us to look at each individual yeast cell.
Researchers at this lab at the University of Colorado in Boulder are working to create history.
Pretty consistently, there's someone using this.
They've developed a first-of-its-kind scientific tool that could one day save lives all over the world with one shot.
We've developed a way to identify mutations on the SARS-CoV-2 virus that can evade antibodies.
SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that causes COVID-19. Tim Whitehead leads this study. He says identifying these mutations early can help them get ahead of different variants of the virus, one day helping to protect humans from more dangerous strains.
So instead of playing catch up with the virus, we can go and give you that shot ahead of time. We're going to catch the virus ahead of where it's going to go.
To understand the effectiveness of vaccines and antibody treatments, this model of the coronavirus illustrates how its spiked proteins latch onto human cells, leading to an infection. But antibodies actually prevent those proteins from binding to the cell. But when that same virus mutates, the antibodies no longer recognize it and fail to protect against the virus.
We'd like to be able to know ahead of time whether that treatment is likely to work. And we can do that by already mapping the mutations that this antibody treatment works against.
Here in this lab, to match those mutations, they're using a secret weapon called Baker's yeast.
And so each of these dots is like an individual yeast cell.
Here's how the new tool works. On the surface of yeast, Whitehead and students designed a genetically modified version of a material to recreate the SARS-CoV-2's viral spike proteins. From these modified proteins, they're able to track mutations when they form or escape antibodies. Their goal, unlike what happened with the pandemic, is to beat these variants before they develop in the real world.
A universal vaccine would include a high immune response against all possible variants.
And researchers here are one step closer to making it happen.
The next step is to identify escape mutants from the patient's own set of antibodies.
A step towards making a priority for leading health experts a reality.